The first thing he remembered was the smell. Not of glory, not of victory, but of wet wool, burned metal, and fear. On a gray June morning in 1944, as the landing craft lurched toward the beaches of Normandy, a young American infantryman named Frank Ergang realized that his life would never go back to what it was before. He was not a general, not a famous hero. Just one man in a crowded boat, knees shaking, fingers clutching his rifle while the horizon flashed with gunfire. When the ramp dropped, the world exploded. Cold seawater rushed in, men stumbled and fell, and the air filled with the crack of machine guns and the thunder of shells. Frank ran because everyone ran. Sand kicked up around his boots as bullets chewed into the beach, and every few steps another body went down. There was no time to think about courage or patriotism. There was only one rule: keep moving forward, one step at a time, because stopping meant dying. Surviving Normandy did not mean the worst was over. It meant the war was changing shape. After the landings, Frank and his unit pushed into the French countryside, into the hedgerows, thick, ancient walls of earth and brush that turned every field into a trap. The enemy could be just a few yards away and still invisible. Days blurred into nights, and nights were broken by bursts of gunfire, shouted orders, and the dull shock of artillery. The men lived wet and tired, their uniforms soaked through, their stomachs never quite full, their nerves constantly on edge. At first, Frank served as a medic. His job was to move toward the wounded while everyone else tried to stay under cover. He crawled through ditches and across open ground, listening for cries of pain, hands sticky with blood as he tried to stop it with bandages that never seemed enough. He watched friends slip away in his arms, learned to recognize the moment when a man's eyes stopped focusing and his body went limp. Under fire, there was no time for long goodbyes. A few words, a last squeeze of a hand. And then he had to move on to the next man who might still have a chance. One day, the war caught up to him. In the middle of a fight, with shells hammering the ground and rifles cracking from the hedgerows, Frank was hit. The shock was numbing, heat, then cold, then the heavy weight of his own body refusing to move the way he wanted. For a moment, he understood what it felt like to be the one lying on the ground, waiting for help that might not come. He was nearly captured as German troops pressed close, but he was pulled out and evacuated, his life hanging on a thin line of luck, skill, and timing. In the hospital, surrounded by white sheets and the smell of disinfectant, Frank's body slowly healed, but his mind could not forget. Some men went home after a wound like that. Frank did not. After a brief recovery, he was sent back to the front, this time not as a medic, but as a rifleman. The faces in his unit had changed, many of the men he had known were gone. The replacements were young and eager, not yet carrying the hollow-eyed stare of the veterans. Frank now had to do what he had once tried to patch up. He had to aim at another human being and pull the trigger. The war pushed on toward the German border. And with it came one of its coldest, most brutal chapters, the Battle of the Bulge. Winter wrapped the forests of Belgium in ice and snow, turning every foxhole into a frozen grave. The men fought not only the enemy, but the cold itself, numbed fingers, frozen boots, breath steaming in the air as they tried to stay alive under constant threat of attack. The German counteroffensive slammed into American lines with shocking force, cutting units off, sowing confusion, and testing every soldier's will to keep going. Frank endured nights where the sky glowed with artillery flashes and days where the silence felt almost worse, because it meant the enemy might be moving in the trees. Rations ran thin, and sleep came in short, restless bursts. Around him, men disappeared from the roster, killed, wounded, captured, or simply gone in the chaos. The front did not move in clean lines on a map. It moved in small, bloody steps, paid for with names that would never be printed in history books. Daily life at the front was a grind that wore down the body and the spirit. Boots never fully dried. Clothes smelled of sweat, mud, and smoke. Letters from home were folded and unfolded until the paper grew soft and fragile. Cigarettes were passed around as if they were pieces of normal life. Jokes were told to cover the fear. Every morning, the same routine: check your gear, move forward, hope you make it through the day. Every night, count who was still there and who was not. Near the end of the war, as American forces pressed deeper into Germany, Frank was wounded again during an attack on an enemy-held town. This time, it was clear he could not go back to the rifle line. His superiors transferred him to military police duties, a role farther from the front but still within the long shadow of the war. The guns finally fell silent in Europe, but the quiet did not bring peace inside his head. Memories of screaming shells, broken bodies, and the faces of friends he had lost stayed with him long after he hung up his uniform. Years later, Frank Ergang decided to put his memories on paper. The result was his memoir, Etched in Purple, One Soldier's War in Europe, first published in 1949. In it, he wrote not like a distant observer, but like a man who had carried stretchers, fired shots, and watched life drain away in muddy fields. He described the hunger, the exhaustion, the fear, and the constant pressure to keep advancing meter by meter, no matter the cost. He wrote about the anger that built up in him, at the enemy, at the cruelty of the war, and at the fact that survival could feel heavier than death. Some historians and researchers have debated how closely every detail of the book matches official records, but there is no doubt that Frank Ergang fought in Europe, was wounded, and carried the scars of his service for the rest of his life. Whatever the exact line between memory and record, Etched in Purple captures the emotional truth of what it meant to be a frontline American infantryman in World War II, a truth written not in medals and parades, but in fear, endurance, and the quiet guilt of having lived when so many others did not. This narrative is inspired by and based on the memoir Etched in Purple, One Soldier's War in Europe by Frank J. Ergang, along with historical commentary on his service and the wider experience of American soldiers in the European theater.